All right, good evening. Welcome to the very last for the spring series for the Natural Hazard Speaker Series. We're very lucky to have Keith Acree here, especially being all the hours he's probably putting in with the coronavirus. He asked that we can go ahead and if you have questions, we can put them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll all the rest we'll see you at the end. Feel free to take it away. Thank you.
Want me to go ahead? Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me this afternoon or this evening. I'm Keith Acree. I'm the Public Information Officer at North Carolina Emergency Management. So I'm the guy who's kind of in charge of the communications effort, the outreach that we do here at North Carolina Emergency Management. So our mission here at NCEM is to help the state prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters and emergencies. So we deal with everything, obviously, from hurricanes to tornadoes to floods to currently the COVID-19 pandemic we're deep in the middle of right now. So the presentation I've kind of got for you today talks a little bit about what I do and what we do here and how we do it. And I have to admit, I put this together many weeks ago when Shailene first asked me about this, and then we had to reschedule. So at the time I was creating this sort of, our watermark event to that point had been Hurricane Florence. So you'll see a lot of references to that. But since then, obviously, COVID, this pandemic has come along, and I think that has probably eclipsed Hurricane Florence at this point in terms of magnitude of an operation and length of time we've been dealing with something, but we'll talk a little bit about that more as we go along. I guess I'm supposed to tell you about me and how I got where I am and sort of what my little life story is. So I was a journalism major by trade when I went to college, and I worked in the TV news business for about a decade. I graduated from UNC Greensboro with a degree in broadcast journalism back in the early 90s, and I did a short stint. I came out of college during a recession and there wasn't a whole lot of work, so I did a short stint at University of Missouri and worked on a graduate degree in journalism there that I never finished because I got a job and came back to North Carolina and started off as a TV news producer. And I did work as a TV news producer and assignment editor for about 10 years at 4 different North Carolina TV stations, both in the Greensboro, High Point, Winston-Salem market, and then in the Raleigh-Durham market. And in 2000, I left the TV business and went to work for state government. And I came on as a public information officer for what was then the Department of Correction. And for 17 years, I did public information and, public relations for the state corrections system for prisons and probation and parole and the State Parole Commission. So one of the big events we dealt with during that whole time period I was there was the death of Eve Carson at UNC and all the changes that happened to the probation system at the state as a result of that whole incident. And then all the change that has gone on in the state prison system since then. And I left the state prison system shortly before we had 5 employees murdered at 2 different prisons and got pulled back from my new job at emergency management to sort of help with that. And then for the past 3 years or so now, I've been in emergency management here. I'm one of 2 public information officers here. We have a second guy that I work with named Brian Haynes. He comes to us from the Forest Service. He has a lot of incident management experience on the wildfire side. But we can talk a little bit more kind of about how that fits in as we go along. So I wanted to kind of start off with just talking a little bit about organizational structure and how I kind of fit into the big picture here at emergency management. So how do I switch my slides here? There we go. So can you see the slides now? So this first thing you should be looking at now is an org chart that kind of shows the incident command system. And incident command is something that is used across the nation. And every public safety agency that responds typically organizes themselves in using the incident command system in some form or fashion. So at the top, you see an incident commander, and then right under that, you'll see three positions: the public information officer, the safety officer, and the liaison officer. So the public information officer, that's my section. I lead the group that responds to what we call the public information function. And you can see they consider it pretty important because they put it right up at the top, and it answers directly to the incident commander. And then all the other operational sections are kind of down there at the bottom of the org chart, like operations and plans and logistics and finance. Even though my job title is, if you talk to the HR section at the Department of Public Safety, my job title is communications officer, but in the emergency management world, I refer to myself as the public information officer because that's an important distinction. On this next slide, you see 15 different emergency support functions that are used in the emergency management community to organize under the national response framework that FEMA puts together. And public information, which is what I do, what we do as public information officers, falls in the ESF 15 category, which is external affairs. We have another guy on staff here whose title is communications officer. He's the ESF 2 guy under communications, and his job is to manage things like satellite radios and walkie-talkies and IP communications and those kind of things to make sure that people can stay in touch and communicate as we respond to a disaster. So if I refer to myself as the communications officer, which is technically my job title in HR, everyone thinks I'm the radio guy, and I'm not. So that's why I kind of have to play that little game and make that distinction. But that may be a little more in the weeds than you wanted to get about how emergency management works. So we'll move on. So like I said, when I first started putting this presentation together, I was sort of dealing with Hurricane Florence as our frame of reference, as the biggest thing we'd ever done. Our state EOC activation for Hurricane Florence lasted for 29 days. We're now on day 45 of our response for COVID-19. And that is just since the full state emergency response team stood up. We activated the Joint Information Center, which is where the public information officers work and where we do the work of writing the press releases and responding to the media questions and handling the social media and updating the websites and all the things that we do as professional communicators. We stood that Joint Information Center up about 2 weeks before the state EOC did. And our partners at Public Health over at the Department of Health and Human Services, they stood up their Public Health Coordination Center for COVID-19 like in late January. So they've been at this a really long time, much longer than the 45 days we've been activated here. But 45 days ago when we activated is when we brought everyone together in the state EOC. And initially we had a whole bunch of people here working, 200 plus a day. And then, the state started putting all these social distancing guidelines in place, and we have gradually pushed more and more people out to work remotely. So the numbers here are getting smaller and smaller, and there's talk about, we're probably next week or the week after going to move to a completely virtual state EOC operation, Emergency Operations Center operation, which some other states are already doing, where they really have very few people, if any, in their state emergency operations center. The challenge for us on that is going to be if we still have to support daily or almost daily news conferences with the governor and other state officials, we're going to have some bodies here to manage that. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So that's just a little bit of perspective as the magnitude of the event we're in right now. Moving on here. So here's a little bit of sort of some metrics from what we did for Hurricane Florence 2 years ago. And this was over the course of that 29-day response, 1,300 calls we responded to, more than 1,000 tweets we pushed out, hundreds of Facebook messages. And I don't have any metrics yet for our COVID-19 response, but I can tell you we're way beyond 18 press conferences at this point. We've done at least one a day for the past 45 days. Our other metrics may not reach as big as some of those, but we've also launched some other new initiatives, which I think, touch on as we go along here. I put this on here just because it gives you a sense of what our workspace looks like, not because furniture is fascinating, but because there's an interesting story behind this. When we built this building, I don't know, about 8 years ago and opened it up, this room had 8 workstations in it. And we worked pretty hard to get it expanded to the way it looks today, which is about 16 or 17 workstations. And we thought that would be really helpful to us for COVID-19, or for any kind of response, hurricanes in particular. And when we first activated here for COVID-19, we had that room full of people. And then, like I said, the social distancing started to become a thing. The stay-at-home order happened, and we had to start pushing people out of the room. So now we're back to really working about 8 people in a room that we intentionally increased. So it's a little ironic that that happened, but just want to talk a little bit about the 2 terms on the screen there, Joint Information System versus Joint Information Center. So when we bring a bunch of communicators in the emergency management world together in one place to sort of work together and collaborate and communicate and get a message out to the public, we refer to that as a joint information center, or that concept. And when we do it remotely, or when we don't all come together in the same space to do that work, we refer to that as the joint information system, where public information officers or communicators are working with each other collaboratively, but we're doing it through some remote means, whether it's, email, chat, phone conference, whatever. That the GIS has become a lot more meaningful recently, since sort of everyone has started doing it in the social distancing world of COVID-19. And we really struggled a lot to do that in prior days. We just went through a big effort with the communications we do on the nuclear power side of our business. We have 4 nuclear power plants in North Carolina, and we have to organize the communications efforts around, should an emergency ever occur at one of those plants. And we have to have federally regulated exercises we participate in twice a year for 2 of the plants every year in our state. And FEMA evaluates those. And for years and years and years, that has always been centered around the Joint Information Center model, where we would all come together in the same room and do these drills and exercises. And only recently, just in the past 8 months or so, has at the federal level, we've made the shift from that JIC model to that GIS model, the Joint Information System, and the feds have sort of made that the new norm. And that was really before COVID happened. All that was kind of going on. We kind of led the way in North Carolina on that. We were one of the first states to adopt that, and had to go this winter, back in January and February. I was up in Chicago first, and then out at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, at Oak Ridge National Labs, where we were kind of, North Carolina was sharing our system on how we did that with our partners from Wake County and Mecklenburg County, where we have nuclear power plants, and our partners from Duke Energy. But it's just interesting that we made that shift, right before all this COVID stuff happened. So it's very timely for us now. So this next slide is just some visual representations of what a news conference event for us looked like in the pre-COVID world. So you see a packed media room there, both of reporters in the lower left, and you see a packed stage full of people and presenters in the top slides. And then if I go to the next slide, this is kind of what it looks like in the COVID world now. We've cleared the room out pretty much. We're social distancing on the stage, and we're doing everything with a pool camera. We've got one camera that shoots the presenters at the podium. We have a second camera that focuses just on the American Sign Language interpreter. Another recent addition we've made is adding Spanish language interpreters. That we've only done that in about the past 8 months, working with UNCTV on that. We have a great pair of sisters who you may have read about in the newspaper recently. They've become a little bit of celebrity of their own, who do our Spanish language translation for us. And we've also added things that we never had before, getting all the media sort of out of the room and allowing us to completely control the pool feed has given us a lot of flexibility we didn't have before. We've started using teleprompter for the speakers in the room, which they never had before. Today, I don't know if you had a chance to watch today's news conference at all, where Governor Cooper rolled out his 3-phase plan to sort of restart the state, as we sort of come down out of COVID-19. But we used a bunch of graphics in the presentation today. We had a bunch of charts and slides that the Secretary Cohen walked us through as to what the state's plan was. And that was a first for us, and we kind of modeled that after what we've seen Governor Cuomo doing in New York for several weeks now. Our people have been watching that and liking it. So the North Carolina version of it rolled out this afternoon at 3 o'clock. But anyway, that's kind of a little bit about how the news conferences work that we do. Yeah, so you can see, so one next slide here, one in the bottom there, you see the view from the podium looking out toward the pool camera and the 2 prompter monitors we have up there now. And then in the upper left is kind of how we display the American Sign Language interpreter on the screen with the speaker, in this case, the governor. I talked about the Spanish interpreters. That's just something we've just added in the past year. We had to set up a little audio booth for them. There's 2 of them that work together in tandem, and they switch back and forth because it's pretty mentally exhausting work to have to do that. And not only do we provide the Spanish language audio stream, which is a second web stream that we provide in addition to an English web stream, we also provide closed captions in Spanish as well. And that's available to digital media organizations to put on their websites. It's available to broadcasters to take to air. Some broadcasters run the Spanish language audio on a secondary audio channel on television. Some of the Spanish language media outlets, radio stations and TV stations take it directly to air in Spanish. So that's worked out pretty well for us, and we're still trying to grow the audience for us. But COVID-19 is really the first big event we've had the Spanish language available for. We had one little winter storm, you might remember, back in February was the very first time we used it, but then we rolled right into the COVID response, and we've used it pretty much continuously now every day for, I don't know, 45 or 50 days, it seems like. I threw a slide in here on VIPs. This has not been so much of an issue in COVID response, but it's always an issue in hurricane response, especially big hurricanes. When North Carolina gets hit by a big storm and we activate the state EOC, all kinds of people come rolling through here that they look to us as the public information officers to kind of deal with these folks. So you can just see a little sampling of some of the people that rolled through here during Hurricane Florence. There's Brock Long, who was the head of FEMA at that point, spent a few days with us. You see Ben Carson, who's the HUD secretary there. At the podium, the blonde woman is Kirsten Nielsen, who was at the time the secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The gentleman in the bottom row in the green golf shirt is the Secretary of the Army, and he's talking to Gracia Check, who's the regional administrator for the Southeast region of FEMA in the U.S. And then in the bottom right there, all the military guys you see, General Milley is the Chief of Staff of the Army, Secretary Hooks of the Department of Public Safety in North Carolina is the shorter gentleman in the black shirt, and then Admiral Bushman in the blue uniform is the Coast Guard commander for all the Coast Guard forces in the eastern U.S. And then General Hunt, you see on the right, is our Adjutant General of the North Carolina National Guard. At the time, he was not the Adjutant General, but he is now. He was sort of our deputy commander at that time. And then lower left there is one of our staff members, and Ivanka Trump. And she showed up, not at the state EOC, but in North Carolina at one point. Some of the more day-to-day stuff we do that's not in the middle of an activation for a big storm has to do with a lot of safety messaging. So some of the examples on the screen right now are a lot of the pre-made safety messages that we have sort of in the can, and we can roll out whenever we need them for any kind of hazard. If it's a hurricane or a winter storm or a flood or anything else, tornado, who knows what it is. And some or all of these things might be applicable. So we talk a lot about generator and grill safety when we have big power outages, because invariably someone always fires up a generator in their house. And as much as we say it, during every big power outage event, we typically always have one or more, sadly, deaths due to carbon monoxide poisoning. So that's something we always try to message. Occasionally we'll see people, bring a grill into the house and set a fire or something like that. So we have these kind of pre-made graphics. We have them in English and in Spanish. And they're we use them on social media a lot. We use them in other messaging as well. We're going to talk a little bit about readync.org. That's our primary website that we use for all of our preparedness messaging. So, we talk about our mission here at Emergency Management is to help people plan, prepare, and recover from disasters. So this is all about the prepare part, plan and prepare here. So you can come to readync.org. You can get information to make your family's own preparedness plan. You can find out what you need to build a kit. You can look at information from flood gauges. You can look at information about power outages across the state. You can find evacuation orders when those are happening during a storm. You find out where shelters are open. We've worked pretty hard to take information from a system called WebEOC, or the Web Emergency Operations Center, which is our main computer system where all our information goes into during a response, to pull information out of that system and automate it onto the website. So the power outage information is all automated. That's been real popular. That takes data feeds that come into us from Duke Energy, from Dominion Power, and from the North Carolina Electric Cooperatives, and from electricities, which are the public power providers in the state, the cities and towns that provide power to their residents, aggregates all that together into a big data feed and shows you, collectively what power outages look like across the state. FIMAN, or the Flood Inundation Mapping and Alert Network, is our big website that has all of the state's about 300 plus flood gauges coming into it, and give you information on river levels and show you where flooding is predicted to occur during a tropical storm event or a big rain event. FIMAN gets tons and tons of traffic during a hurricane event. So that's a data stream we're pulling in. We're pulling in the evacuation orders from WebEOC. As the counties enter them directly into WebEOC, they appear on the website. And then same thing with the shelters. As the shelters are entered by the counties, they can appear as well, so people can see where shelters are open. Until recently, we had both a web app and a website version of ReadyNC. The web app had sort of outlived its usefulness, so we recently shut that down, and we've sort of got all our eggs in the website basket now. We've got a much better mobile-friendly website than we used to have.
So
Another
there
part
was
of
a
our
question about how do you evaluate the effectiveness of these communications?
Good question. On social media, I think you look at those typical measures that you see on social media. How often are your things getting shared? How often are they getting remessaged by others? What kind of response do you get in terms of likes and that sort of thing? But I think it's pretty reassuring to us when we put an important message out there about severe weather, or the threat of severe weather, and we see that shared, hundreds or thousands of times. That way we know, we can feel good about the fact that the message is getting out there. What you see on the screen now are an example of kind of what a severe weather message from us might look like. We have a team of 3 meteorologists on staff here at North Carolina Emergency Management, and every day they put out a series of slides like this that they put it out kind of like an email form that go to a bunch of people inside state government, and they sort of serve as the advisors, the state emergency response team, to the governor for all the weather information that they need, but their products are very useful. And we try to share those on social media every day, so you may be familiar with seeing these. We're trying, the thing we haven't automated yet that I want to automate in the future is to find a way to pull these graphics into the website, and, well, we don't have the app anymore, but just directly into the website, sort of automate that process. That's something we're working on now. So that's a key piece. That's a standard daily sort of part of our messaging, is the weather stuff. We have a series of preparedness events we go through every year on the calendar in a cycle. The year sort of ends in December with winter weather preparedness. That's typically the first week in December. So you see some more of those sort of pre-prepared graphics there. This is typically a big social media campaign for us. It's a week-long thing, just to make sure people are getting ready for winter weather. They've done the appropriate things to get their house ready, to get their vehicle ready. They've maybe got that winter weather kit in their car with maybe a shovel or some salt or things they might need in case their car breaks down in the snow. We typically, for these, get the governor to do a proclamation. That's sort of a formality that we sort of go through every time, standard part of the process. So Winter Weather Preparedness Week comes in December. Severe Weather Preparedness Week comes in the spring every year. That's typically the first week in March. And that's when we talk about the threats of severe weather like thunderstorms and tornadoes. And that's also the middle of that week on Wednesday is when we get to go out into the schools and do the statewide tornado drill, where all the kids practice getting down in the hallway and doing sort of the duck and cover thing, what they would need to do if a tornado were to strike their school. And we always remind people about the importance of having multiple ways to get their weather warnings. Most people do that with some kind of smartphone device these days, some kind of app on your phone that will give you an alert when there's a severe weather watch or warning in your area. The NOAA weather radios are a little more antiquated, but still a real effective way to do that. The great thing about a NOAA weather radio is it can wake you up at night should there be a threat of maybe a tornado in the middle of the night when people are sleeping. That's a pretty dangerous time to have a tornado come along. So you want to be prepared for that and have a way to wake you up when that happens at night. Hurricane Preparedness Week is coming up real soon, like in 2 weeks. First week of May is typically when that happens. So right now we're kind of struggling with what is Hurricane Preparedness Week this year going to look like when we're in the middle of a pandemic response. It's probably going to be largely a social media event for us. But tropical weather doesn't stop because there's a pandemic going on. So it's just as important now as it ever was to make sure people are ready for hurricane season. So, but then you see some of the examples of graphics and things we've used in the past for Hurricane Preparedness Week. And then the Hurricane Awareness Tour is something that we do every other year. It's actually an event that NOAA puts on, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They do 2 tours every year. They do one in the Caribbean, sort of in the Gulf Coast region, and they do one in the East Coast of the US. And we generally get a stop in North Carolina every other year. So this past year, we had the Hurricane Awareness Tour stop in Charlotte. 2 years prior to that, we had it in Raleigh-Durham at the airport there at RDU. And so we're due to have it again next year. Don't know where it's going to be in North Carolina next year, maybe Wilmington, maybe somewhere else, not sure. But this is a real fun event where they bring in, the US Air Force brings in its Hurricane Hunter aircraft. NOAA brings in its Hurricane Hunter aircraft, and we bring in a lot of other interesting things to see, like some of our swiftwater rescue teams and our National Guard units that we use for hurricane response, including our North Carolina HART team, or our Hilo Aquatic Rescue Team, which is sort of a model in the nation for how helicopter rescue happens during flood events and hurricane events, and even other things like hikers that get stranded in the mountains and that sort of thing. So you see one of the Hart aircraft helicopters there. That's a real fun event to put together when we have to do it. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun too. And then every September is National Preparedness Month. We've traditionally at the national level, Preparedness Month is observed in September. You see some of the products we've used there for that. That kind of, it's a month long, it's a 4-week event as opposed to some of these single week events. So they typically focus on a different thing each week. So it might be financial preparedness in 1 week. Do you have an emergency fund put away in case you're hit by a disaster, to help you sustain your family for a period of time when you might lose income or might lose a large amount of property? Do you have flood insurance? Might be a focus for a second week. Another week might be the typical messages about having a kit and being prepared and those sort of things. So there's a different focus of each of the weeks during Preparedness Month. We always want to remind people not to forget their pets in their preparedness plans. So dogs and cats make for a lot of really cute little graphics that we can use in social media. You see some of those there. The shakeout, the Great Southeast Shakeout, or the Great American Shakeout, happens every year in October, 10:17 a.m. on October 17th. So 10:17 on 10:17 is when the shakeout happens every year. And that's the time when we want people to practice their hurricane safety, not hurricane, but earthquake safety. So drop, cover, and hold on is what you're supposed to do during an earthquake. If you learn stop, drop, and roll for a fire when you're in elementary school, similarly, drop, cover, hold on is what you should do during an earthquake. My one earthquake experience in my lifetime, since we're not really in a big earthquake prone zone here in North Carolina, but they do happen from time to time, was in Raleigh, 6 or 7 years ago. We had that strong quake up in Virginia that was felt pretty strongly in the Triangle area here. And I was sitting in my office. It was about 10 in the morning at work, and sort of felt this funny shaking sensation as the whole building kind of shook, and kind of got up and walked around and thought, what was that? That must have been an earthquake. Hadn't really experienced that before in my life. And everyone in the building that I worked in, a 3-story building, as I walked toward the front lobby and was making some comments to some other people in the building, suddenly all the doors to the stairwells fluttered open, and everyone from all the upper floors came running down the stairwells and was like going out the front door to get out of the building. I just thought that was an interesting response for everyone who wanted to sort of get out of the building and get outdoors and be away from a building that they thought might collapse, when really the guidance is to drop, cover, and hold on, not run outside. So I share that for what it's worth. Maybe that's the one thing you learned today is drop, cover, and hold on.
They're saying why the October 17th? That, sometimes it could be on a weekday and sometimes on a weekend.
Yeah, that is a good question. I don't know why they picked that date. I don't know. But as long as I've been involved with the shakeout, it's been 10:17 a.m. on October 17th is the time to do the drill. But I'm not sure what the significance of that date is. Maybe it's a big date in hurricane history. I'm sure someone's Googling that right now and will tell me shortly. The podcast is a new venture for us that got started this year by our sort of parent organization, the Department of Public Safety. So I work alongside public information officers for the other public safety agencies in the state, whether that's adult correction and juvenile justice, or state highway patrol, or alcohol law enforcement, or SBI. So we share some resources in common, like some graphic artists and a video producer and those kind of resources. We also have a social media team that works jointly for all of us. And one of the things the social media team does is produce this podcast on a regular basis, probably about every 2 or 3 weeks we have a new episode. So we had our hazard mitigation team on one of the early episodes of the DPS Safety Scoop podcast. And I think most of y'all in the class are probably familiar with the concept of hazard mitigation, or the work we do to get homes out of the way of future storms or future hazards. We do a lot of buyouts and rebuilds and improvements of homes that might be in flood zones, but hazard mitigation isn't just all about flooding. It can be about really any hazard. Can happen to get homes out of the way of wildfires or any other things that might happen to them. 211, North Carolina 211 is one of our great partners and one that is really active right now in the COVID-19 response and sort of the front door to all of the call centers that we've got activated. 211 typically works in a common call center, but right now they've got all of their operators, or call specialists, they call them. They've got about 70 people across the state. Sort of this network of paid folks and temps and volunteers they've knitted together for their COVID-19 response. They're all working from home right now. They've got some really good software they can use. Folks can log in from home into this call management system. They can access information from our computer systems here at Emergency Management, get on all our websites, pull information off those. We have a liaison that we're constantly feeding information to so that the call centers have the latest things that people wanted to know about based on whatever the hazard is that we're responding to. In this case, it's obviously the pandemic, but 211 is just, I can't say enough about how great they are. They're an excellent partner for us. They are super easy to work with. They can work with any other groups that might come on board. So right now we've got sort of in the fold other call centers like the Hope for NC helpline, which is mental health support basically for the general public. We've got the Hope for Healers line, which is basically mental health support for first responders and medical providers. We've got numerous other call center lines for lots of other things. We've got a group called Community Care of North Carolina that is handling a lot of the medical and diagnostic sort of questions that go along with the pandemic. They're sort of transitioning in now and taking over for a role that the North Carolina Poison Control Center started off, handling the very first COVID-19 call center we stood up at the beginning of this response. Was staffed by the poison control people, by North Carolina Poison Control. And they kind of got a little bit overwhelmed by that and needed to get back to their regular work. So they're transitioning out of that now. We're transitioning Community Care of North Carolina in to do that. But 211 still serves as sort of the big front door, or the portal to all of these other call center places. So we sort of refer everyone to call 211 no matter what their need is, if it's related to food or unemployment or anything else that might, be a need they have during the COVID response. And then 211 is really good at making referrals to the right places to get people the help they need. And they're doing hundreds of calls a day. They passed the 25,000 call mark a few days back. They also have we have information that goes out via text from 211 on a daily basis. You can sign up for, you text. In this case, on the screen now, you see NC Dorian, which is our text tag for Hurricane Dorian. But right now, you can text COVID-NC to 898-211, and you'll get daily, twice a day text messages from 211 with just current information updates related to the coronavirus. What's next? So we talked about FIMAN already, but that's kind of what the FIMAN website looks like. All those different colored dots you see across the state there are individual flood gauges, which on that website you can click into and zoom in, and some of those gauges will just tell you straight up what the water level is at that particular location. And some of those gauges, which are fancier than others, have predictive capabilities to them, where it can show you based on National Weather Service forecasting and other forecasts from NOAA what the flood inundation level is expected to be in a particular place. And FIMAN is really cool because you can zoom in really close to a street or neighborhood, and you can actually see on those areas where we do have the predictive gauges, you can look at a particular building and see, based on the high water mark that's predicted for that area, how much water is predicted in that structure. Is it 6 inches? Is it a foot? And even will give you a damage estimate on what the estimated damage would be to that building in terms of dollars, based on how much water is predicted in a flood. So FIMA's an extremely valuable tool that emergency managers across the state use when they're trying to inform their decision-making for evacuations. That's something they rely on a whole lot. I briefly touched on nuclear power plants earlier. We've got 4 of them in North Carolina. I should say 3 in North Carolina and 1 just over the border in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Each one of those plants has a 10-mile, what we call emergency protective zone around it. In that zone are warning sirens that are used for outdoor alerting to alert people when there's an issue at the power plant. So I don't know if any of you happen to live in the 10-mile zone around a plant, but if you do, you're probably familiar with those sirens, and you're familiar with the once a year emergency information booklet you get from the utility company, from Duke Energy, which has all the information you're supposed to know if you live in a zone and how you need to respond if there is an emergency at the plant. Everyone should know that lives in one of those zones where their reception center is that they would need to evacuate to if they did need to evacuate. It used to be in the old days, until very recently, that every few years you would get some pills in the mail from the utility company. They're little, what they call KI pills, or potassium iodide. Potassium iodide is a drug that protects your thyroid from radiation in the event of a radiation release from a power plant. So one of the protective measures that might be ordered during a response to a nuclear power plant incident might be, in addition to maybe a shelter-in-place order or an evacuation order, might be in order to take your KI pills. But these are things that we exercise. Like I said, every plant has a federally graded exercise every other year. So since we've got 4 plants in North Carolina, we're doing 2 exercises every year. When the coronavirus response started, we had done a dress rehearsal for the Catawba nuclear plant exercise, and we were scheduled to have the graded event on April 7th, and FEMA has now postponed that due to the fact that we're all in the middle of a coronavirus response. So that's one thing off our plate for the moment, but that's a response to the nuclear power plant incidents is pretty challenging because, one, it's graded by FEMA, and there are certain things they're looking for in your communication efforts for every response. They want things to happen within a certain time frame, and they're in a very particular way. And this is the whole process where I described earlier, where we've shifted from the JIC model, the Joint Information Center, to the Joint Information System. So doing a lot more of this communication work remotely, as opposed to having people in the same room. And we do this collaboratively with all of the counties that are in the areas around each nuclear power plant. So we work with the public information officers from the county government. So for the Harris plant in Wake County, we work with Chatham, Harnett, Lee, and Wake counties. And then there are 7 counties we work with around the Harris nuclear station, which is in Mecklenburg County on the shores of Lake Norman. And then the Catawba plant, which is the one in Rock Hill, South Carolina. We work with 1 South Carolina county, the state of South Carolina government, as well as 2 North Carolina counties. Catawba is typically always the most challenging communication effort for us because it crosses state lines and it involves 2 different state governments. So that brings a whole bunch of new dynamics in there that we don't have to deal with when we're dealing with everything on one side of the state border. And then Brunswick is probably the easiest of the plants to deal with. One, because it's on the coast and most of its 10-mile zone is out in the water where there's nobody living. And it only involves 2 counties, Brunswick and New Hanover. So logistically, that's the simplest of the plants to deal with. Although I will say Brunswick is the plant that always seems to have the most problems at the plant and things going on. So anywho. Next slide talks about Know Your Zone, and Know Your Zone is something we started work on last year. If you ever watch the Weather Channel during a hurricane response event, you'll see how they talk about predetermined evacuation zones for all the states along the coast as a hurricane moves up the coast. North Carolina was one of the few states on the East Coast that didn't have any predetermined hurricane evacuation zones. So Know Your Zone, which we started last year, was our effort to build those. We've been working with about 22 different counties in the coastal area to come up with predetermined zones. They look at sort of their highest risk areas and make that their A zone. The counties can have anywhere from 3 to 5 different lettered zones from A, B, C, D, all the way up to E. Most counties have gone in the, most counties have 3 zones, maybe an A, B, C. For their highest risk areas, B and A, their mid-risk B, and their lowest risk areas C. But there's a few counties that have gone with 4 and 5 zones. We started this last year. We built the website out for it, which is knowyourzone.nc.gov. We had 3 counties that piloted it last year during the 2019 hurricane season. That was Pasquotank and Camden counties and Carteret County. So this year now we're in the process of just finalizing the last few maps for all of the 20-some counties along the coast. We're putting those up on the website. I think just today we made all the counties live in the lookup tool. So there's a lookup tool on that website you can go to, enter your address, and it'll tell you if you're in one of those 20-some coastal counties, what county you're in and which evacuation zone in that county you are in. Sort of in a later iteration of Know Your Zone, we want to also add in the zones for the 4 nuclear plants. That'll be something we work on down the line. And we had planned to do a big Know Your Zone rollout event with the governor and some folks from the National Hurricane Center and others. We had that scheduled for May 15th, although with the COVID response going on now, I doubt that's going to happen May 15th. It's probably going to happen more like sometime in June, but we're working on getting that rescheduled. And I think lastly, I'll just talk about the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. This is sort of our sister agency at emergency management. Director Mike Sprayberry, who's my boss, is the head of not only emergency management, but also the executive director of the Office of Recovery and Resiliency. And this is the organization that is responsible for implementing all of the recovery programs that are funded through HUD and HUD's Community Development Block Grant for Disaster Recovery Program, or what they call CDBG-DR. It's a big, long acronym. We have gotten hundreds of millions of dollars in recovery money through CDBG-DR from HUD that is being used to rebuild homes and rebuild infrastructure in hurricane-affected communities all across our state, both after Matthew and Florence. We're going to be in this process for many more years to come, it seems. The Office of Recovery and Resiliency has its own communications team that I work closely with on a day-to-day basis. But when that office first stood up about a little more than a year ago, I had to handle some of their communications right at the start. But since then, they've brought on their own team, and they've built a good team over there, and they've got their own communications folks now, so they're handling a lot of that themselves. But I think with that, I think that's my last slide. I'll stop there and open it up to any questions or comments or thoughts y'all might have.
All right, so we'll stop on the start. Those who want to unmute and put your video on, and those who cannot, you can put your chat questions in the chat. Okay, Patience, I see your hand.
Hi. My question I have is just around how you guys manage misinformation and working with the media. My impression of not just doing COVID-19, but in general, people get their information from a lot of different sources that aren't always correct. So I'm wondering how in your job you guys try to counter that, or some thoughts you have about, confronting misinformation and misinformation campaigns.
Yeah, good. That's a great question. That's a big challenge for us. So one of the key messages we've been pushing out during COVID-19 is just really to get your information from reliable sources. That's been a constant social media message we've pushed out. We've had the director make a video or two on that. We've said it repeatedly in news conferences, particularly early on. But we've pointed people to the reliable information sources we want them to use, places like the CDC website and the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services website. We tried to, steer them away from the bad information that's out there. And we've repeatedly said, there is a lot of bad information out there. We have our social media team has they break their team up into people that are dedicated to writing and generating content that we push out is sort of one half of the team. And the other half of the team are people that respond to questions and comments. So the people that are doing that question and comment responding are also a big part of the sort of misinformation battle, answering questions, setting people straight on things that when they see things that are wrong on social media, sort of responding to those posts and providing the right information and providing links to the right stuff. That's a little bit about how we do that. And just, we also try to, the fact that we're out there every day, daily, doing a news conference is a great opportunity and a great way to do that, to comment on things, misinformation that we see out there, and to put the right information out there. So it's not all the time that we're in a position to be going out every day and doing a news conference, but when we are, it's a lot easier to respond to misinformation than when we're not doing that. So, good question.
Hello. I have a not exactly a similar question, but a related question. Obviously, during this crisis, with the different levels of government and sort of the different styles that are working, in tandem or, sometimes antagonistically, how do you sometimes deal with some of the more off-the-cuff things that'll happen? For example, someone will say something that might need to be walked back, or someone might say something on, as a senator of the state that might be directly contradicted by a governor, of the state. How do you sort of deal with those things, and how do you sort of align the messaging so that, people are already confused, but so to reduce and mitigate that confusion?
Yeah, that's interesting. Fortunately, we don't see a ton of that. We do see it now and again. We had an instance yesterday where we had to clean up something that Secretary Cohen said. She got asked a question live in a news conference, and it was really kind of something she got asked about that was out of her lane. She gave an answer, and it wasn't right. And we had to sort of call that reporter later who asked the question on TV and clean it up. A lot of times the things we deal with like that are things that sort of have political implications to them. A lot of what's going on now in the COVID-19 response, are things that are directed by the governor, and people that aren't politically supportive of the governor think we should be doing something different, think we should be reopening the state quicker, more on a faster basis. So you see a lot of that kind of dialogue going on, and information put out by people that maybe oppose the course the state is on. We try at emergency management, we try to be as non-political as we can about things. And we've really tried to make a focus during the COVID response on, basing things on science and what the epidemiologists tell us and what the public health people tell us, and not to get into the political realm and let the politicians in the governor's office deal with the politics of that sort of stuff. But I hope that kind of answers that question, maybe.
Yeah, it helps. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Margaret. I have a question about volunteers. Before coming here, I worked in Virginia with Medical Reserve Corps volunteers a lot. So we used our volunteers for a lot of what you talked about today. And I'm curious what that looks like in North Carolina, because I just haven't heard as much about incorporating volunteers in these efforts in this state.
We've got volunteers working in a lot of different capacities right now. When you walk in the front door here at the State Emergency Operations Center, you get your temperature screened and you get asked a bunch of questions about how you're feeling and if you've been exposed, and they stick a little sticker on your badge every day to tell you, to indicate that you've been through that medical screening. And that's all done by CERT volunteers, Community Emergency Response Team volunteers are doing all that screening. We have Civil Air Patrol volunteers that are doing a lot of logistics work for us around the state. Caroline Farmer, who runs the governor's office on citizen participation and volunteer stuff, she's here in the state EOC every day, helping to coordinate a lot of that kind of work. They're doing outreach to different civic groups and things about volunteer opportunities that are out there. We've got a big effort going on to register volunteers who are trained medical professionals, maybe doctors and nurses that are retired or for whatever reason out of the workforce. We need those folks to kind of come back to work and help us with the COVID-19 response and help us with medical surge if and when we get to the point where we exceed the capacities of our hospitals and we need to open up, alternate care sites that we're talking about. That's going on as a volunteer effort as well. So those are all things going on now. And it's just, we're constantly talking about other volunteer opportunities as well. We've been messaging a lot about food banks lately, and that food banks need your help right now, not only in terms of donations of money and of food, because so many people are out of work and relying on food banks for groceries right now, but can use your help in terms of just being a volunteer at the food bank. So that's just a few of the things we're doing there.
Thanks. So the medical professionals that you're trying to get to sign up to volunteers, are you trying to get them to sign up through CERT?
They sign up through Terms, which is the website that we use for all our training and exercise. They sign up through there, they get vetted through that process, and basically they're checking, if you're a nurse or a physician or a CNA or something, they're checking with your licensing board to make sure you're in good standing there. And they're doing a criminal background check to make sure you're not something you shouldn't be. And I think if you pass those two big tests, then you kind of go into the pool. And should a medical provider, a hospital, or some other facility say they need, 5 LPNs, an RN, and a records person, they can put that request in to the pool and hopefully get the help they need. We've got, 40 or so people working out of that pool now. They're mostly working at long-term care homes and other kinds of various types of nursing homes and licensed care facilities.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
I guess I have a question. I was wondering how you could speak to planning for future pandemic-like events and how they may co-occur with some national disaster issues.
Yeah, so that's a popular question these days. We keep getting the question, and we've done a couple interviews on it recently about what happens when the next hurricane comes and we're still dealing with COVID-19 response. So, we're thinking a lot about that. What does hurricane sheltering look like when we have to do it, in the middle of COVID, and we have to think about social distancing? Obviously, sheltering a bunch of people in the middle of a big high school gymnasium is not going to be a model that works for us, if we have a hurricane early this season. So we're going to have to look at, doing that a little differently. Maybe we're using an entire school building and we're, putting families into classrooms to distance them in a shelter. We're opening up larger numbers of much smaller shelters. And how do we do things like social distancing in a search and rescue operation? You got to get a bunch of guys in a boat or a helicopter to go do a rescue. It's really hard to stay 6 feet apart in a scenario like that. So some things you just got to do what you got to do. But yeah, so in terms of pandemic response, what does the next pandemic response look like? We're sort of working on that too. I think there's a lot of concern that, COVID might kind of come in waves. It might kind of die down for a while, and then we might get another wave again next year. So we're thinking about, in terms of long-term sustainability, how do we deal with wave 2 if and when that comes? So those are all things we're thinking about. And I don't know that we have all the perfect answers yet, but we're trying to plan for those now.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Well, maybe quick. How do you prepare for the potential that, sorry, let me start that over. When you start out the year and you have like a budget for what you're going to do, is the hurricane, like if a hurricane comes, does that affect your operations? Like, are you going to have like a diminished capacity this year, or like what's this doing to your resources as of now?
Yeah, so I guess I can just talk generally about how funding in our world works. Most of the funding that emergency management uses comes from the federal level. We have sort of a few $1 million that the state gives EM sort of as its operating budget every year, and that basically pays for the salaries and benefits of a couple hundred people that are on staff here. But all of the response stuff we do gets paid for out of the state disaster response fund, which every year the budget puts more money into the disaster fund. And in times when we have big disasters, the legislature will make additional appropriations. And you've seen a lot of those in recent years. We typically have what we call the DRA, or the Disaster Response Act. There's been one in 2016, one in 2017, one in 2018. There have been, in some years, we've had multiple disaster response acts to sort of start up new programs and put money into the fund. When we get a federal disaster declaration, most of the programs we implement are funded on a cost share match with FEMA. So typically FEMA pays 75% and the state has to match 25%. So the money that we're going to the legislature asking for and that we're getting in these appropriations through these disaster response acts or disaster recovery acts are the money we need for that 25% state match. So like the FEMA individual assistance program and the public assistance program, which helps cities and towns rebuild infrastructure and like hazard mitigation, that all those work on basically that 75-25% match model. And then, that whole HUD funding from CDBG-DR we talked about, that's all separate, and there's not match involved in that as far as I know. That's a little bit about how the funding on that works.
So it's not bad if you, like, I'm thinking of this past year too, when the state legislature didn't pass a budget. That doesn't have any negative impacts on you guys, I hope.
It has some impacts, but the legislature was pretty conscious of the fact that they needed to, meet our needs and meet the recovery needs that were going on for storms. That was pretty high profile stuff. So other agencies suffered by the lack of a budget more than we did. But, generally when we go to the legislature and ask for something, we generally get it in the name of disaster recovery because that's a pretty high profile and necessary thing. One of the challenges we've had, I'll just explain to you a little bit, is FEMA has a program they call UASI, or the Urban Area Security Initiative, which is where the largest metropolitan areas in the US get a lot of funding to combat terrorism and bioterrorism and things like that, and just general security in a large urban area. Charlotte was one of those designated areas and had been for almost a decade. And in the last 2 years, Charlotte fell out of that formula to get that UASI funding. So that was sort of a hurt for Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and particularly a big hurt for us in the year when we're expected to host the Republican National Convention, which is a huge security event for Charlotte and Mecklenburg County to put on. It's what they call a national special security event, which has all kinds of special security implications with it. So to lose that funding in a year when you had to also host the Republican National Convention was a sore spot for Charlotte and Mecklenburg.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, Keith, I want to really thank you for taking your time when I know you're very busy to speak with us. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I enjoyed it. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.